First, welcome everyone to this last but not least panel. As we've heard from our host, money talks again, so we're going to be speaking about financing. It is a pleasure to have 5 exceptional experts here with me today, and I'm going to introduce them before I introduce myself. We'll start with Victoria Zinchuk, Head of Office, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Romania. Please take a seat and welcome. Snezhina Kovacheva, Banker Central and Southeastern Europe, European Investment Bank. Thank you. Teodora Preotasa, European Funds Administration Director, Investment and Development Bank. Marcel Ionescu Heroiu, Senior Urban Development Specialist, World Bank. And Ionut Stanimir, Marketing and Communication Director, Romanian Commercial Bank. My colleague has already introduced me briefly. I work for ICLE Europe, which is a city network. We've heard about city networks throughout the day. They've been playing an important role in the collective action of cities for climate neutrality. And in Net Zero Cities, I lead the work on climate city contracts, which again, we're all familiar with by now. And as you all know, climate city contracts have an investment plan which takes multi-level governance and action plans to the territory of financing, let's say, and finding climate action. And in order to start this discussion, I would like to warm everybody up with a question addressed to all speakers, and we're going to do a little bit of a game. Start with 3 words and try to stick to 3 minutes. To summarize, what should city representatives better understand or prepare when seeking financing for their climate neutrality actions? We know the cities are not necessarily used to undertaking these efforts. So again, remember, maybe start with 3 words and then unpack them in 3 minutes. Is anybody volunteering first? However you prefer.
Well, let me start 3 words, but then if we do 3 minutes, it's not going to be 3 words.
Yes, we need to unpack the 3 words.
Well, I would say action being first, curiosity and open-mindedness being the 3 words. And why? Having worked now for more than 20 years at EBRD and nearly 8 years in country management jobs in Europe as well as in other countries, I am quite convinced that money is not an issue. So access to financing in the municipal sector is not an issue. We talk a lot about capacity, but then again, capacity is not an issue when somebody has a curiosity and open-mindedness in order to seek help, in order to make things happen. And this is where I move to action. Since financing is available, including for the climate-related, and we call it green financing, for me the big question is every decision maker taking the time in order to move towards securing such financing? Because then preparation of projects, which of course is one of the big tasks before the financing is there, can be still facilitated by so many different organizations, including EBRD, but not limited only to EBRD. And this is what we see whenever certain programs are being financed. We are signing tomorrow a project with Brasov, where indeed green financing will be applicable. And it takes those 3 words and those actions in order to make things happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would say commitment, preparedness, and resilience. So clearly, you need to be prepared. So, I mean, I think we share something in common. EBRD and EIB were very project-driven. So when cities come, the idea is to have a clear and credible pipeline, and this is the conversation starter. This is how we begin to engage. So I think it's key to understand that there's a right window. So a lot of work has happened already. So if you come at pre-feasibility stage, it's a good opener. But normally we look at projects that would say happen from the moment we sign. So from the moment when cities have access to the funds in the next 3 years. And obviously things change. Grants come in and out, programs change as well. So I think the moment you have this project-based pipeline, clearly grants and sources are important, but I think the moment you focus not on the grant availability, but you really start bottom up with your projects and priorities in mind, then you're also much more flexible. Whatever the opportunities are and whatever the challenges are in your environment.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I think I will start indeed with the 3 words. First, it's strategic. Second, aligned. And thirdly, technically. And then, of course, taking into account what the previous panelists mentioned, when it comes to the strategic, I think we need to have a better focus in terms of strategic priorities, and also a very important prioritization, because this is also related to what they have to do in the future in terms of not only getting finance, and here I will return back on the technical part, where I will say that first we have to prepare the projects. So this means that we need to have a better alignment in terms of preparation of the project, and then to search not only those, or not looking only to, because you mentioned grants, but I think everyone knows that we don't need to count so much only on grants, because Romanians' needs are higher than the financial allocation. We know that we have different other ways to ensure the financing, and this is related to the, if you want, a blending or a mixed source of financing when it comes to the technicalities. And then when I mention aligned, of course, we have to prepare projects that are aligned with EU taxonomy, with CCRD, the Sustainability Directive, and then of course with the national targets as well, which is really important. And of course with the green targets, which are already established throughout the different strategies. So I think this is actually what it is important for the 100 cities.
Very clear.
I would also do the 3 words. I would say vision, courage, and coalitions. Vision, I think the European Commission did a brilliant thing, sort of rallying around Mariana Mazzucato's idea of missions. And they chose one specific goal. It helps that the goal is measurable, and then around it you can plan. When you prepare an action plan for transition to climate neutrality, you know exactly what the goal is. You know what actions you need to take to achieve the goal, and you know how much it would cost. And I think this is part of the reason why maybe for other important priorities like climate adaptation and so on, maybe it's more difficult to mobilize forces. So kudos to the Commission for coming up with the idea and then rallying different actors around one common vision and goal. Courage, because it takes people with courage, like Mr. Courage here, to say, although we're like a developing country, like we can aspire to do more. And I don't think, as a Romanian, like I felt more proud than to see something like M100 take shape. In my view, it's probably, I wouldn't say the only time, but one of the times where Romania can be a beacon, let's say, for the rest of the world, an example of good practice in a particular field. I think we probably have the highest number of cities as of today with concrete action plans for transition to climate neutrality. It's absolutely no small feat. And then coalitions, again, you had 6 ministries present and still present today. You had different levels of government, regional development agencies, city halls, different institutions that have come together around a common goal. Obviously, this is sort of like just one snippet of all the work that M100 team and others like have done in the past. It's like a monumental effort. There's things going on right now, like in different cities. Iași is preparing an urban lab tomorrow and over the weekend. Different cities that sort of like are undertaking different things. Private banks, private companies that have rallied themselves. They're part of coalitions. Constanța, Iași, Cluj, and so on are active participants in achieving this goal, which is again also fantastic. And I think it's like you have a platform like that can inspire others in Europe and beyond. I was happy to hear that we have colleagues from Sarajevo, Elbasan, from Podgorica that are present here and want to learn from the Romania example. Excellent that Turkey, Portugal are also willing to learn from this example. I think it's sort of like a testament to the work that M100 team and their partners have done. So kudos and thanks for all your efforts.
Well, thank you for having me. Great panelists. From my perspective, I will say exactly what Marcel said, but with other words. So, first of all, the three words. The three words are repayment, competitiveness, and democracy. But remember, I will say exactly what Marcel said, but from other perspective. Repayment. You have to give the money back, not because necessarily the bank wants it back. It does want it back, but actually behind any repayment scheme, there's a plan. If you invest, you have to generate revenue. If you borrow the money, you have to have a plan. Any household would think in the same terms. So cities also have to think in that terms. Second, competitiveness. While you will take the money or the grant or whatever source, there's going to be another 10 or 100 cities doing exactly the same. Exactly the same. They will engage in the same project, maybe bigger, maybe bolder, maybe with more vision. So you'd better have your competitive edge well defined, because we live in a world of city-states. And that is a big, big transformation of the world today. And thirdly, I said democracy. And it's my third time that I will say exactly what Marcel said, but with other words. We are doing a lot of transformation for the people, but not with the people. So when you redefine transport, education, or a vision for a city, you'd basically have to have not only a wide coalition, but also people chipping in. What exactly do they want to become in the new vision of the city? Do we want to be the competitive hub for green transport? Well, we have to redefine what is taught in the local high school. And then it means that we actually have to redefine what is taught in the primary and secondary schools, which means a wider conversation.
Thank you very much, and I'm so happy that we started with these three words that we can continue to unpack now, because you've opened up so many pathways for discussion now. Victoria, you mentioned that you work closely with many cities in Romania, right? And what are the main obstacles you see cities are facing when they are trying to access financing for climate mitigation actions in particular?
I would say what other panelists have been mentioning are their empowering as well as their disempowering factors that those cities that cannot move forward are not dealing with. So for us, at this point in time, most of the cities of the size that we can finance as well, because unfortunately, and here I'm saying personally and professionally, unfortunately, we cannot cater for every size. So we have to work with cities that are sizable enough, because they have to work with a financial institution such as EBRD, where our requirements are probably higher than if they were to get this financing from a local commercial bank. So when we talk about larger cities, then most of them, whenever they wanted, they got the financing. And as you know, probably those cities include Timișoara, Iași, Constanța, Alba Iulia, name it. So I don't really see the obstacles. The obstacles often is because the financing plan is not relevant, because the project is not ready, because it takes so long to build those coalitions, it takes so long to get the technical details right, it takes so long to define the project, it takes so long to decide if this is the priority project based on the strategy of the city. But I don't really think that while speaking about financing, the obstacles are based on this. Well, there are as well capacities of the cities to borrow. I mean, this is something that we haven't mentioned, and of course, all of you should know that there are certain limitations at this point in time that Ministry of Finance imposes on cities. So there are certain cities that could definitely borrow more, but they don't. So this is probably things that are external factors that outside of the control of the city. But then if you think that the city of Rešica could issue a bond, then probably it's a question of their open-mindedness and ability of different cities that believe that they have no access to financing is to start thinking creatively and get support in order to see which instruments will be the most relevant. And I just came here after a series of meetings with various stakeholders in Bucharest. I was colleagues from the infrastructure team speaking about PPPs. So when it's not possible for the city to borrow, the PPPs option is still there. Of course, it has to be of a certain size. You have to have the capacity to absorb this, but financing options are there. And I think that the obstacles per se, apart from something that is actually imposed by the Ministry of Finance with regard to the maximum size of financing that the cities can get from the banks, everything else is something that can be easily dealt with.
Thank you. So continuing on the topic of instruments, EIB is also providing a lot of support to cities in advancing their climate action. How do you, Snežina, think that existing financial instruments such as loans, grants, and blended finance can be better adapted to meet municipalities' timelines, maybe capacity as well, and needs?
Right, cities. I mean, cities are encoded in EIB's DNA. So last year alone, we did 14.5 billion for direct urban green lending in the European Union. But I think also every country has its own particularity. So I will speak to the Romanian cities that I interact with and focus on. So I think definitely grants, this is the reality, have so far been a key pillar of urban green investments. And when it comes to the grant process, because you ask grants, loans, and blended finance, what can be better? The simpler, the faster, the more straightforward the grant process is, the more time there is for project implementation. And at the same time, the quicker you have visibility on capacity, on eligibilities, the better. Because right now, local authorities, they have to navigate a very complex landscape of often overlapping eligibilities. And I think we have to be very honest here. Everybody's first source of preferred financing is grants. So how we see it at EIB as the climate bank and in the EU bank, we are there to make the grants walk further. So we're there to leverage the grants in order to maximize the impact now, rather than wait in sequence over time. To only focus on what grants can enable you to do. So from this point of view, the time of pre-financing grants is over. We're no longer discussing about short-term liquidity gaps. We're looking at the long-term commitment of local authorities to go along the non-repayable sources. And from that point of view, very practically, long tenors, or let's say tenors of the loans which correspond to the economic life of the project. This is one. Availability of the loans, so having them available for the project implementation period, ideally without fees. And the last point is some flexibility. And I think this comes again to the preparation, to the resilience. So if you have a project list or let's say a framework, even if some elements shift within this framework, you need financing that will also work with you and have a certain degree of flexibility when it comes to that support. And I fully share Victoria's observation about Ministry of Finance. When you have clear borrowing capacity, I think there we can talk about indeed what cities can afford to do now. And I think when it comes to European projects, institutionally this is recognized by the Ministry of Finance because there are all these exceptions for EU-funded projects. So when it comes to climate action, to green projects, it would be great if in a similar institutional way this importance of green projects is recognized, so that for the larger borrowers who clearly have the capacity, they don't have to delay investments they could already benefit from now. I'll be very short with a practical example. Energy efficiency, in particular in Bucharest, this is something we have been supporting for years. So if you want to renovate 500 apartment buildings, you know, if you're one of the sectors and you can afford it, it's unfortunate if you have to wait for 2, 3, 4 years to sign in many tranches financing you could be deploying much faster for the benefit in the end of your citizens, where you also see the benefits of the reduced energy bills. So I think there are a lot of quick wins that could be immediately visible if the institutional framework at national level recognizes the importance of green projects.
Great, this makes me really easy to makes it really easy for me to move on to the national level, right? Teodora, so you were not here yet, but in the previous panel we had this mention, and it was Laura who mentioned that President Ursula von Leyen mentioned that there will be a link in the European budget with the climate city contracts. And I was wondering, do you want to comment on that? What do you think that's going to mean for Romanian cities? And what do you think, how can we bridge the gap through national institutions and through public institutions to the needs of the cities between the European and the local opportunity?
Yeah, before commenting on that statement, I will put a bit of context, because last week we had a very important conference at MIPE level. I'm no longer part of the Ministry of Investment and European Project. However, I still sometimes commenting on everything what is happening in terms of the future. So the discussion was, of course, Romania, and alongside other member states, we are going to receive an important amount of money for the next budget, 2027-2030. However, I think it will be very much important to see that our strategic goals are going to be shift in many priorities. So this means that we have to prioritize first the cohesion, and then, or first the agriculture, the policy, the common policy, agriculture policy, and then the cohesion policy as well. So this means that we are not going to have the same budget as it happened for the last 2 cycles. I've been there for the last 2 cycles. I know how it happens to program all the resources available from the EU level. So I think this is the first and the most important step. Firstly, we need to realize that, as I mentioned in my previous intervention, that the grants are not the only way or the only alternative for the cities, for the local authorities, because this is not going to happen due to the fact that we are going to face constraints in terms of grants component. So this it means that, and here I would refer on the Investment and Development Bank and this role. I know that it's the beginning, so everything what we are discussing now is in theory, because we are setting up the ground and we are launching products. And I think the focus has to be, to speed up everything what we are doing there in order to become a reliable partner also for the future when it comes to the next budget, the next MFF. Why I'm mentioning this? Because then returning to the statement of the President von der Leyen and the fact that this label, because it is a label, when a city is part of first being selected by the European Commission and then those that are being selected at the national level, it will have priority because one city that is already there selected, this means that he can receive financing firstly from grants, of course, because this is, the instrument that was used largely in Romania, and then secondly with the financial instruments. And now the role of the IDB will be to help and to support the cities. Of course, not only the cities, because the 4 key priorities or objectives of the IDB are to focus on sustainable development, to focus on the EU absorption, of course, EU funds absorption, and then supporting investment, and last but not least, technical assistance. So then concretely, how we are going to support the cities, and not only the cities, but also the companies, because this is also important to look also for the subordinated companies and the local authorities. We are going to support them with a financial instrument. It had been launched, and I have my colleagues that are responsible with. I'm still focused on the EU funds, so this is everything, and every time when I will say something, it's in relation with the EU funds. However, these 2 instruments that they were launched this year are with our own capital, and one is for direct lending for the local authorities and the companies as well, and another one it's under the guarantee form, also for the same types of beneficiaries. So, however, I think it's not enough. This is what we discussed during our way to come here. It's not enough, so definitely we need to focus in the future, and I think this is the first step, and it's very important that you have invited us today, because this is the start of an important dialogue, not alone, of course, with all the IFIs. We cannot, there is a place and room for everyone, and without them, definitely it will be impossible to support this initiative. And I think, and I will try to conclude, I think also it will be really much important to focus on the small localities as well, because if we look to the requirements, and those requirements that are related to the fact that we need to put on the table climate contract and an action plan, for some small localities it will be very difficult to do that. We all know that they are lacking in terms of capacity, they are lacking in terms of EU absorption. So we need to have or to prepare a plan in terms of supporting the small localities, also with the technical assistance, not only with the finance. So the finance, of course, is there. We can find it, either grant, either financial instruments. But I think it is the most important is to build up this capacity, which is still lacking when it comes to small localities. And then, indeed, as I mentioned, because also during this programming period, it happens that we have some thematic concentration, which means, I give an example, I don't know, we have to set up some targets in terms of climate, for example. So this is gonna happen also when it comes to the prioritization of smart cities. And probably, and most probably, we are going to have a thematic concentration dedicated on the smart cities as well, due to the fact that we have this statement that is engaged by the President von der Leyen. So I think we have a plan, we know how to approach it, and we have to stay in this close dialogue to see how to put, the plan to happen. And last but not the least, because also we have the IFIs, but we need to mobilize also private sources, private capital. This is going to be very important. And she mentioned, Victoria, about the PPPs. We know that she's been struggling with these PPPs since I met her first, so it happens that even until now we don't have nothing on only some pieces of legislation. The IDB as well, we are trying to set up a department. We know that this is a transversal responsibility. However, we are trying to build up a department that is going also to deal with the PPPs, to have also another alternative to the state budget, because it was mentioned clearly that we have some constraints in terms of the state budget and the limit, the threshold that are for the cities. That's it. I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that we leave the question for Marcel, for now, because you mentioned the smaller cities with a limited capacity, and I wanted to pick up on that first with your notes and ask him, could commercial banks better support cities, especially the ones that are small and have limited technical and administrative capacity to take on this very complex project? And how could you see that happen?
Basically, we do our best to explain to all people what do we look at when we lend. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is very long.
You want the long answer.
Yeah, okay. So the long answer is actually, what do we want to do where? That's the real question here. So what you have on the table is a couple of strategic sectors where everybody will grant attention. What you have on the table is a couple of strategic locations where everybody will grant attention. And what you have further down the field is places where there is not attention, there is not focus on investment, and to be honest, I think also directing resources there has to be done in a different logic than in a leveraging finance for accelerated development. This is a diplomatic way to say, I don't think we will focus there.
All right. Now we're coming to a question that I really like to ask, generally speaking, which relates to best practice. And Marcel, I will address this one to you based on your vast experience with cities across the region and Romania. Which innovative financing models and partnerships, as we were speaking of partnerships, have proven successful and replicable? And what would you say are the main ingredients that are also the most replicable and you would like to talk about as best practice?
Victoria said this in a previous conference that I saw recorded. I didn't participate live, but she said, listen, when you think about doing a public investment, whether it's a road, a park, thermal rehabilitation of an apartment block, think how that investment can also mobilize private investment. We often forget the raison d'etre of cities is to provide people with a raison d'etre. So cities are places of opportunity. So first and foremost, like when you think of investments, when you do set up a vision, prepare a strategy, you need to think, okay, how can this investment create opportunities? I think the Draghi report is probably the best self-reflection type of document that I've read produced by the Commission or any other type of entity. And it clearly says that we have to think beyond just sort of like EU funds for the purpose of using EU funds. We need to think of how EU funds can stimulate private initiative, how it can stimulate, help create jobs, entrepreneurship, and so on. Obviously, this means we need to rethink a bit the way we do things. There's plenty of resources, but I think first and foremost we need to sort of think how these resources can be used smartly to also crowd in other resources. Iași is a favorite example for me right now, largely because we work with them, but we see that it's like a community that's alive and thriving. 10 years ago, they used to be out of 40 counties, number 35 in terms of average salary. And average salary is a bit, let's say, closer to people's hearts than GDP per capita. It's now, I think, third or fourth in a county where the sort of the backwoods areas are still very undeveloped. But the city of Iași, largely, not necessarily PPPs, but a live dialogue between the public sector, the city hall, the county council, and private investors have led to sort of, obviously, the universities, which are a big plus for the city, have helped the city sort of let's say, reborn. On our data right now, Iași is in terms of economic development above Timișoara. Normally shouldn't happen if you look at the geographic position, but it's largely because of a much better way of understanding building partnerships with the private sector, but also building partnerships with NGOs, civil society, and sort of like getting the community together around the common goal.
That's great to hear for Iași, especially. I don't know if Timișoara is that excited. That's a nice reflection to have before our last question, since I see that we're going over time. We can continue to reflect a little bit and to wrap up with a question on what would your hopes and expectations be about how we finance urban transition projects in the future, and if we could each take a minute, let's say, to summarize, also based on what we exchanged today. It can be a dialogue among you.
From my side, it's fundamentally learning from each other, because big cities can learn from other big cities, small cities can learn from other small cities. And indeed, this type of platforms like M100 enables this dialogue, enables the conversation between those who want to make things happen and those who made those things happen. And maybe as an example, Theodora, you mentioned about PPPs. Guess what? We have our first pipeline PPP project. I'm not going yet to say which one it is. It's not with the municipality per se, but let's see. And indeed, it does take a lot of efforts and a dialogue and the will for different stakeholders to come together in order to take a plunge and say, yes, we can do it. Because what you were describing about Iași, and I went to Iași and visited the Julius group at the time when we were discussing our next project that has been signed this year in Cluj. And when I went to Iași and I met the mayor and I met Julius group, it was quite clear that the direction of travel is there. And for me, coming after my 5 years in Croatia, it was super inspirational to see that Iași happens, these possibilities that Iași has uncovered. Okay, they could be as well in Timișoara. Cluj is seen as sort of one-off, but it's not the end of the story, it's just the beginning of the story. And I think this inspiring conversations, asking for help, there are so many different frameworks. There's also Eurocities network. The information is out there, and there is always somebody who has already done what you want to do. So you can always, of course, innovate and reinvent the wheel, but where there is already a way and you can just reach out and ask for help, support, then financing, again, is most likely not going to be a real issue. Yes, for smaller cities, it is going to be an issue, but even smaller cities can start talking together. And, you know, like Cluj is trying to work with this whole metropolitan area in order to make sure that those smaller towns and villages can be better connected. But in order to have better connection, you need to have, for example, urban transport. Urban transport by one small municipality will make no sense. But then bringing them together, and this is what many cities in Scandinavia do, not just in Scandinavia, in Netherlands, those ones that really, again, can be used as an inspiration. So yes, if you're alone, if you're a very small town, city, maybe you cannot make these things happen, but in this collaborative spirit, the answers can be definitely found, and solutions for sure.
I'll try to follow from another angle. You've laid it out, I think, extremely well. This peer-to-peer learning, I think, is a real opportunity, also because there is a little bit of a, top-down sometimes approach, and especially when it comes to capacity, I think it's not one way. It's a much more complex dynamics, and We know things about capacity because we have a number of advisory programs at EIB. We really take pride in doing lending, blending, and advising. And I think years ago, I mean, at the national level, there's all these labels that I think everybody is familiar with: Jaspers, PASA, Elena. So we have really, we're very proud to have boosted the capacity at national level to implement projects and absorb EU funds. But at the same time, as great as technical assistance is, nothing beats in-house expertise. And I think we can really tell it, especially with the municipalities we have been working for years. Oradea is an obvious example, where they started 10 years ago and where they are now. It has been a transformative journey. And you start small, you build capacity, you build momentum, and you don't go linear, you go exponential. So I think there's a lot of momentum and power and pride really into what's happening within this M100 collaboration. At the same time, I think I'll be provocative here and say that financial constraints are an opportunity because they force you to prioritize. And I think sometimes you have to make very hard choices, which can be very smart, strategic choices, if you really have to be very clear what you absolutely want to do no matter what. I'll do this and this if this and that grant come through, but what I absolutely want to focus is this. So from this point of view, we see there's a little bit of a reporting fatigue. There's a lot of data, a lot of financial reporting nationally going on. But I think this can also be a great opportunity for a city to look at, okay, here's what we stand, what we're going to invest in. If we do this and that, in 10 years, my revenues will look completely different. So I think the type of conversation you can have with a forward-looking, open-minded finance department, which obviously delivers their reporting obligations, but they really are there in order to bounce off ideas and implications with the project planners. This is where magic happens, because I think when you have commitment on priorities and when you're very aware yourself of where you stand financially, that's probably a recipe to create the best opportunities and to go for those.
Very well said. Yeah, because I mentioned at the beginning that we have to start to be more strategic. And I know that we are governed by different strategies, and this is also going to happen in the future. I heard, I think Dan Nekula mentioned in the previous panel that for the future we have to embed the two approaches from the two instruments, cohesion and RRF. So this it means that for the future we are going to implement reforms and also investments. So this is also another shift. As it happens, we thought all together that RRF is going to be an instrument, crisis instrument that is to ended up the implementation, but this it means at the end that we see that is going to be also the future. So that I'm mentioning that because, and I'm repeating also the fact that this it means that we are going to prioritize better our investments, and not only the investment, but also we are going to have linked to those investments some specific reforms, which is also making harder the implementation and the process, because we can see now how we are facing and how much we are struggling to implement RRF. So what I would like to see also in terms of IDB, not only in terms of the future implementation, but also for us indeed, is to have this possibility to have an important exchange of expertise, and not only for the cities, but also for us in terms of a new established bank. Also looking here to the other panelists, it will be also important to set up the ground also in terms of technical assistance, not only because we all know that we benefit from all types of support from the IFIs in the past, but we are going to still need to have in the future, because this is another important aspect. And then what I would like to see within IDB as well is what I mentioned before, that mix of sources of financing. So if we are going to mobilize, and I'm saying this because now our focus was to launch guarantees, to launch some lending financing, but in the future we have to focus also on equity side, and link it to the fact that the cities are going to, and to make, if you want, a separation, distinction between large cities and those that are smaller. Probably for those smaller, we can come with some financial instruments by adding also a grant component in order to still support them. And as I mentioned previously, technical assistance. And for large cities, of course, for those, we are going to have these types of blended financing from different sources. And IDB can be there, not only providing technical assistance, but also providing, if you want, throughout the syndicated loans, support also with our own capital. So this is, I think those are the priorities. And I link it very much with the future, because I think everyone is looking to see what is going to happen in terms of new financing. But I know that the future is going to look totally different. So we need to stay together to ensure this transfer of expertise between institutions, those that are actors in Romania's field. But also we need to mobilize all types of financing sources that are available, and to involve as much as it's possible private sector as well, from the capacity perspective, not only from the financing perspective. Thank you.
I think Romania's entered, if I may leave with a hopeful message, the era of dreaming big and the era of yes, we can. I remember 15 years ago with Adi and a couple of other folks from the local level in Mamaia were talking, like, how would it be if we had, like, a law in metropolitan areas? And then a few years back, Liviu Băileșteanu and the team at the excellent team at the Ministry of Development made that reality happen, right? So, like, we went from how would it be like to actual things. I think we can achieve great things, like if we look beyond sort of like our just like small circle. I was similarly with Ionuț in Iași, like at an event like a few months back. And the Faculty of Informatics there wanted, like, they have an open air amphitheater and they wanted to rehabilitate it. So there was like, okay, how do we go about it? So they talked to Alexandrina Dinga from Civica and says, like, listen, can we mobilize some people to get this done? And sure enough, she did. They have a architecture company that offered to help pro bono to prepare the architectural concept for that, and it's done. They got financing in 2 seconds from Amazon, Continental, currently Almovio, and Cognizant of 100,000 euros. And now they're working with the City Hall on getting the sort of the construction permits and all the bureaucratic procedures to do the implementation. So if it's possible to sort of come up with an idea, mobilize the people, and then actually achieve it without necessarily going to the rector of the university and asking for money, I think the same can be achieved in a myriad of other fields, including the implementation of the 13 or 12 action plans for climate neutrality.
Okay, so two things from my side. It's one thing we say in the corporate world: you cannot cost cut your way to growth. And basically, this is the same assumption which is valid for cities and countries. The second thing is when you realize that you cannot cost cut your way to growth, it means that you must have a vision. And that vision needs to be anchored in being very competitive along the value chain. So legislation, tax, permitting, education, PPPs. Without that, you'll come to the commercial bank and you'll basically arrange a balance sheet optimization, and that takes you nowhere.
Apparently the other one doesn't work. What we hear is that we have to start with a dream, and the dream has to be big, right? But then we have to break it down into very pragmatic, let's say, steps. And thank you very much. There were a lot of takeaways for me, and I hope for the audience too. For me in particular, because this is not my background, so this is all, my curiosity is genuine. And I hope now I can go back with a lot of messages to cities, to the cities in net zero cities and at European level, and our colleagues from M100 can take many messages back to the Romanian cities. Thank you again, and I think we're going to be released now.
Thank you, Silvia.